Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to present here today the ICPerMed Vision Paper for 2030 that has been promised for a while. How can personalized approaches pave the way to next generation medicine? So I will start with a little bit of context for why we wrote the vision paper. And it's actually the same reason why there is ICPerMed. There's a lot of things changing in health regarding technology with the digital revolution and all the large databases, enormous amounts of data that is nowadays available for patients and citizens related to health. The huge developments in omics technologies, and also the novel computational approaches and artificial intelligence methods that are being developed to actually make sense of all of this data. Then the approach to healthcare that is nowadays focusing on patient through a lot of profiling of health information, and that is meant to drive healthcare into more of prevention and less of treatment, and also early intervention. And this will have an impact on the sustainability of healthcare systems. Since they're very expensive, it is predicted that this type of personalized characterization of each patient will actually lead to better prevention, to earlier diagnosis, to better intervention, and as such save costs in terms of with positive benefits in terms of economics, but also, of course, positive benefits for the patients and the citizens. And finally, societal expectations are also changing, and over time we see that patients and also citizens are better informed, they're digitally literate, and there's also an expectation of better health for longer and accompanying our longer life expectation. So we have been thinking about how personalized medicine will look like in 10 years. We didn't want to go any further from that, but in 10 years, what will this look like? And we'll have adopted personalized medicine approaches, and how far should it be going? And this was really designed to maybe help us set objectives and see how we can get there, and what is the way that we need to take. How can we pave the way to get there? Of course, ICPerMed has been thinking about this for a long time, and it has developed an action plan that tackles several topics along the value chain, and we have reflected a lot on these topics to define this action plan, and it has been used already a bit, and you've seen already a diagram with all the activities that are now ongoing, and that resulted, at least in part, from this action plan. All the activities, all the CSAs that are clustered under the umbrella of ICPerMed that are designed to promote research and lead us further into personalized medicine implementation. So while defining the vision for 2030, we had a number of premises that we wanted to think about. Of course, personalized medicine needs to be implemented as a medical practice centered on individual characteristics, leading to improved effectiveness, but also in diagnostics and treatment and prevention, but also added economic value and equitable access for all citizens. Then ICPerMed vision is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals related to health, and that define a vision for good health and well-being for all ages, and will promote healthy lifestyles, preventive measures, and modern, efficient healthcare for everyone. And then the basic premise of ICPerMed is that research and the advancement of sciences is really what is pushing forward this field, but not just biomedical science, but also economical science and social sciences. So we have this focus of a social perspective as well. It's not moving. Not moving. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think there's maybe no battery. Anyways, you can move to the next one. Okay. So to develop a vision for the future, we developed a process, and the process was initially based on drafting a number of perspectives that were then commented by experts, and this together with other initiatives from ICPerMed, namely the conference on personalized medicine in action that took place in 2018 in Berlin, got us to the stage of the vision paper. Can you move one more slide, please? Please? Okay. So these were the 5 perspectives that we initially drafted and were based on our knowledge and what we had been discussing. And they were related to citizen and patient empowerment, to the awareness of health professionals and how they can be educated on personalized medicine approaches, on how healthcare systems can ensure optimal care for patients and also for citizens in terms of prevention, how information infrastructure and management should be take place or should be frameworked, and then how we can recognize the economic value of the personalized medicine approaches. Can you move on, please? And because we have 5 perspectives, but for each perspective there can be different points of view, we decided to ask the experts. Okay, thank you. This is cumbersome, anyways. So we did, the ICPerMed Secretariat developed an expert survey that was sent to 97 experts. So about over 70% completed the survey. Most of them had it fully completed. Their professional backgrounds was a little bit biased towards research, but in any case, other experts did reply, including a lot of healthcare professionals, healthcare providers, regulators, and so on. So there was quite a diversity. And they were replying to the survey from the point of view of European, what is happening in Europe, or what is happening in their own countries. Can you move one, please? Yeah, thank you. And what was asked in general terms and broad terms from the expert survey was whether they would agree with the draft perspectives for each of the draft perspectives, what aspects would they like to change or omit that they didn't agree at all, or they would like to put it in some other way? How was it going in their own country? So how far was this implemented? When would it be fully achieved? Beyond 2030 or before 2030? And very importantly, what were the most important next steps? And we also asked them to provide us with best practice examples. So a lot of this was actually free text, and it took us a while, the writing group and the secretariat, to make sense of the data and come up with all of the main conclusions. And this, together with the ICPerMed conference, led us to the ICPerMed Vision. And the ICPerMed Vision actually had the 5 perspectives. Mostly the experts agreed with each of how these perspectives were framed, and we'll get to that. But what came up is that we found that there were a number of okay, did it work? A number of perspectives. Can you go back? No, okay, never mind. It's okay. A number of perspectives had some common issues among them, so there were transversal issues coming up in every perspective that were actually putting together 4 pillars related to data and technology, to health systems, to the reforms for health systems, to intersectorial synergies, and then to education and literacy. So I will go through the first perspective. Actually, I will go through all of them, but not with much detail, because I think you should all read the vision paper. The first perspective was was related to citizens, so how citizens will be in 2030 informed, empowered, and engaged, and responsible for their health data. And this means that health data will be controlled by the citizens, including the input, the monitoring, and the access. But of course, for this, they will have to have reliable information, understandable sources of health information, and those should be available by then. Perspective 2 is related to health providers, healthcare providers. So these will be medical doctors, but also a number of other professions like nurses and pharmacists and so on. And also them will be informed and empowered and engaged and responsible in relation to healthcare data from their patients and from the citizens. So they will be using this health information and research results for personalized medicine routinely in the clinic. They will understand that there will be multidisciplinary teams with different health professionals integrating healthcare decisions. There will be healthcare education, and healthcare professionals will have to adopt a multidisciplinary view of the clinics. And then clinicians and researchers will work closely to support the development of personalized medicine solutions. The third perspective will be related to healthcare systems that should have an equitable perspective, and this should be available in 2030 for all citizens. There will be an allocation of resources within healthcare systems that is consistent with society values, and there will be a secure data flow from citizens to regulators to healthcare systems to researchers. So data will be flowing in a safe way. Perspective 4 is related to available health-related information for optimized treatment, care, prevention, and research. So very complete electronic health records that will be used by healthcare professionals, harmonized solutions for data privacy, safety, quality control, security, and then treatment and prevention will be provided for the personal benefit of the citizens. And finally, perspective 5 pertains to the economic value by establishing the next generation of medicine, so by establishing personalized medicine approaches. And there should be a reasonable balance between investment, profit, and shared benefits for the citizen. There will be novel business concepts and models. Telemedicine and mobile solutions promote personalized medicine and are of economic value, and there will be novel jobs created. So regarding the transversal issues, they actually formed some crucial pillars for implementation. And the first one was data and technology. So data and technology kept coming up in each of the perspectives because we felt it was really so important. The experts kept referring to this. And in fact, digital technology in 2030 will be even more an ubiquitous enabler of society. So there will be a new generation in 10 years that will have been born into the digital medium, and it's expected that the attitudes will change. So it will be very different for them to accept how to share because they will be more informed. And in this sense, they will use this information and be used to share this information in a different way. Electronic health records will be complemented by information that is gathered constantly for monitoring health by wearable devices, and also not just by genomic risk estimates, but also by other omics and also information from other areas of life, so behavior, health, lifestyle, environmental exposure, and socioeconomic aspects. They will all have an input into the definition of risk for a particular disease, and then as a result, for improved prevention. Artificial intelligence is, I don't know, we cannot say it's in its infancy, but it certainly has a lot of potential to develop for the analysis and interpretation of these big data sets. And it will be very important to actually provide clinical solutions. So there will be, based on artificial intelligent algorithms, there will be clinical tools that will be developed so that the clinicians can quickly interpret the data and use it in their clinical decisions. But this, of course, requires interoperability and harmonization, and this needs to be embedded in healthcare. And it also requires that there are innovative approaches to ICT, but also flexible so that they can accompany the development of this area. And of course, this includes data management, access, protection, safety, everything that we've been talking about for quite a while. The other aspect that kept coming up were the intersectoral synergies. So we know that between clinicians and researchers, we really need a much closer approximation. They need to be closer so that they can actually benefit the patients in the end. So the clinics is a huge source of information for research. So researchers need to have access to this data, but on the other hand, they need to provide solutions that can be implemented quickly in healthcare. And for that, they also need to interact very much with clinicians. So this synergy is very important, but of course, there are others, and lifestyle, behavior, socioeconomic status, all of that will have an impact on the health risks and the prediction of health risks. So it's important that we consider the policies of other sectors also in health outcomes, and for these synergies between these different sectors need to be improved. And finally, the private sector needs to come up with this. The private sector, we know that personalized medicine is both a driver and driven by innovation in technologies. And this means that a synergy with the private sector that tends to develop this faster will be beneficial for the citizens. And of course, this will mean that there will be novel opportunities for business, and that will probably benefit all. Regarding the health systems, they will have to adapt to these new developments. And one of the things that will shift is the treatment to risk definition. So instead of treating, we want to predict so that we can prevent and that we can promote health and define strategies that will improve health outcomes. And this needs to be reflected in the health systems organizations. Then the economic sustainability is very important, and it has been underdeveloped so far, but we are all, I think, talking about economic sustainability so that we can actually convince policymakers and the politicians that we need to implement personalized medicine approaches. And in this sense, economic sustainability really has to have a social perspective. So it has to incorporate ethics and equity and societal benefits, and not just be a pure cost effectiveness approach. And also for this to work, health system reforms need to develop different reimbursement models for personalized medicine, but they need to see the benefit of this. And they will have to actually realize that there's immense value on the public ownership of data. Of course, this all relies on technology a lot, so there is a need for health systems to invest quite a bit in technology infrastructure, and a lot of this is digital infrastructure, but not only. And this, of course, network and data sharing platforms and so on, which is really a lot of the basis for personalized medicine, will facilitate the synergies that need to take place in healthcare. And this will bring about likely novel professions because clinicians will have to see the value of multidisciplinary. Can you move one further? Yeah, thank you. So clinical decisions will likely be made by a team because medical doctors will not be able to interpret by themselves all the amounts of information and all the biomarker information. So there will be other actors in clinical decisions. And on the other hand, health professionals, both medical doctors and other health professionals, will have to have an education that is more specifically directed to personalized medicine approaches. And so clinicians will probably have to understand a lot better digital aspects, the interpretation of biological information and data analysis, but on the other hand, other types of professionals like informaticians and data scientists will have to understand more what healthcare is about and what clinical decisions mean. Citizen literacy on personalized medicine will also have to include not just control of data and monitoring of data, but also ethical issues, regulatory issues, and data control. And finally, very important, we understand that there has to be a political framework to develop and implement personalized medicine. So politicians and policymakers and regulators have to understand the benefit of personalized medicine to be able to define strategies and frameworks to actually implement it. So they have to be informed, they have to be educated in this sense, but we also need the economical benefits to be very clear so that this can progress. And so I would just finish by saying that personalized medicine is likely not so much a paradigm change, but actually the evolution of medicine in a world that is very rich in technology, in data, and in information. So in this area where all of this is available, it's natural, just natural, that medicine will evolve in this sense and lead us to a much more personalized approach to medicine. Can you put the last slide, please? Okay, so I want to acknowledge the experts who answered the survey, the ICPerMed Secretariat and the Executive Committee, and finally the writing group that is pictured on this slide. Thank you. So I don't know if there's any question or we move forward. Okay, we move forward.
So last but not least, after a really interesting day today, we would like to use this 45 minutes to get a status quo on the 4 working groups we had. Idea is that everybody has 10 minutes to present what's the midterm results. And the idea is that, first of all, everybody knows of the people who are in the different work groups what is discussed in the other groups. And maybe if the rapporteurs and the chairs will want to communicate whether some points should be considered in the other group as well, then they know. If you are quicker, you can get 1 or 2 minutes of questions or comments. I would ask now all of the 4 rapporteurs on the stage, and then we start with working group number 1. And while they're moving, I just would like to mention that this vision paper is with lots of information, and you might consider during the night to have a look in it, that you maybe find some interesting arguments and issues which can be raised tomorrow, because tomorrow will be another 1.5 hours, I think, for the working groups, so you can even sharpen whatever you found until now. So we start with working group 1.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I start with loading now the file. I take the pen in the meantime,
Okay.
so I can take notes from.
Okay.
Turn it up. That one is the one that. Okay. Maybe I can start by while they're okay. Okay, can I start?
Sure.
Yeah. So thank you very much. So I am the chair actually of the working group 1, because we were not really clear about the role of the different chair, vice chair, rapporteur, but we work together in the end. So I will speak for the whole group. Actually, we also agree on the first intermediate message within the group. It was a very nice group, actually, of around 20 people. And I calculated that we were more or less 11 countries represented there, obviously experts. So when they were coming as experts and not as representatives of the countries. But that's nice also to see such a diverse number of countries, including non-European countries, so which is always good. So, just to introduce my colleagues, Vice Chair Marta Puyol Escolar from Spain, from the Spanish Association Against Cancer, and Dr. Terje Pizzo, who is at the end, at the bottom, from North Estonia Medical Center. So, as you know, we were asked to identify 3 leading questions that could address the topic of personalized medicines for all citizens and patients, which is quite a large topic. And the 3 leading questions were role of digital health literacy in patient empowerment, and then transformation of the role of the patient towards the disease through data management, and last but not least, patient and public engagement with their health services. So we decided not to treat the 3 questions as a separate ones, because they are not. Actually, they are interlinked. So we came to actually some conclusions, some first intermediate conclusions that could be applied, can be to all these 3 questions, and they are actually quite interlinked. So if we can move to the next slide. So obviously, we started from health literacy, just because, of course, we need to know that to have people on board, we have to make sure that they understand what we're talking about. They have a full understanding of personalized medicine, what that means, what we're talking about in the end. And we identified some of solutions, and some challenges still there. We think that we should involve more patient advocacy groups. We strongly believe in educating more these patient advocacy groups through even online courses that can be relayed on. Then we also said that, yes, it's important to educate patients, but at the same time, physicians, because we can't assume that physicians are fully aware of what we're talking about when we talk about personalized medicine. especially GPs can play a major role also in guiding the patients and introducing tools that can help patients to recognize the source of information that are out there, especially now in a moment in which we cannot talk about health literacy without talking about digital health literacy. And so the access of information, it's major. There have been some proposals of using patient information leaflet that can better explain to patient the disease and the treatments. Actually, we had a representative from the European Medicine Agency who actually updated us on the work of the agency with national agencies and with also patient advocacy groups in making patient information leaflet more reachable for patients, actually not using PDF format. Seems actually a very stupid thing, but can help, make sure that they are translated so easily accessible also from different countries. But we recognize it still is a challenge to work at all the different levels, because we have GPs on one hand, specialists on the other hand, different when we have pharma involved in the phase 3 clinical trials. So we have different actors and different levels to consider. Next slide. So there is a lack of understanding, indeed, of what we mean for personalized medicine, all the groups involved. So it's not only patients, so we move to health workforce, nurses, but also pharmacists, patients, and physicians, as I said. So we need to use all the different challenges to train all these groups. And one thing was said was actually to probably make a use of case studies to educate physicians better. So just to give like practical examples of what patients need. And of course involving patients in building these case studies. But challenge is how to agree on common training programs that could be applied also for different contexts, different countries, different regions also. Then we move to the subject of importance of accessing data and generating data. So we understand the importance of establishing indicator patient relevant outcome. We need to make sure that, a patient can have an active role also in creating data. So inform patient involving clinical trials in the output of the trials, empowering at the same time policymakers on the relevance of digital health programs. It was a very good contribution from a colleague from Portugal saying we do have digital health programs in the countries, but they are vertical programs. Sometimes they're not integrated with the national health plans. So they're treated like separated, not well integrated. So the challenge that we still face is interoperability. So the discussion was actually quite lively. The difficulties still in implementing the EU recommendations. So much work has been done at the level of the e-health action group at the European level, but still difficult to move from these EU recommendations into national, really national, local, regional implementation. And then, last slide, the building the public trust. So obviously, with well-informed patients, we can make more sustainable health services, and we can also make sure that patients can also participate in the co-designing of the service, because this is the future. So what to do, to allow that, help patients to communicate among each other. Of course, building social network, using social media, patient advocacy groups acting as ambassadors, as peer reviews in the countries to get closer to the public audience. And then we recognize the important role of frameworks such as ICPerMed in these regards, which can provide examples, project, We even talk about some of the projects presented this morning that were so well communicated and well presented that were understandable also by non-experts. This is an effort that probably scientists has to do to make sure that the information can be understandable by the public audience. And the last but not least, actually, we know that personalized prevention should be the first area to be tackled, because obviously it's something in which we have a space to build the trust. Challenge. So the training of the patient advocacy groups, it is a challenge. They're not trained enough. We should do more. Language is a barrier often. Difficult to, and then obviously it's difficult to communicate the benefits when only 20% of the people can potentially benefit from personalized medicine. And that's why focusing on personalized prevention can be an area to tackle more. So that's it. Thank you.
And never underestimate the power of an empowered patient and citizen, because they can put pressure on the system.
Yeah.
Okay, we move to the second work group, and looking forward to your summary.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Eva Winkler. I summarize, I'm the rapporteur of the second group on the ethical and legal and social issues. The chair, Ann Carbon Thompson, is there. And she's a professor in genetics, or that also very strong research background in ethics. And vice chair was Gaetano Giuliemi from the Italian Ministry of Health, and I'm reporting about the results. We had three main leading questions, but first asked our working group, whether there are other issues that they would focus on in addition to that. We tackled one other issue, and I will report about this one tomorrow. And we'll focus on the three questions that we were discussing today, because they kept us in the debate quite until the end. First question, and I will present this now with the discussion, what we consented on, and what will be the next steps that we suggest either for research agenda or for debate. So the first question for personalized medicine was the handling of incidental and additional findings originating from molecular analysis. There was a broad consensus that this is a real challenge. We discussed that we need to be very clear about the definition of incidental finding, because the wording is understood quite differently in different contexts, but also languages. So that needs to be clearly distinguished, for example, from research results that are aggregated and reported back to a certain population only. So we mean more the individual findings of importance for individual patients or their families. We discussed that there are different policies in different countries in place, such that allow for return of results, and policies that are no return policies, and that there is still and remains a tension between the research focus of many of the projects that are interested in one specific question, and the very general interest of research participants. If they were asked, they would want to learn about almost everything that is in their genetic in their genetic record, and this tension is not easily resolved. So in focusing first on what we consented, we consented that there should be a policy in place that speaks to incidental findings, either a no return or return policy, but it should be addressed in research projects. However, a no return policy has the risk to not adequately respond to the information needs of participants. So we discussed also from our colleague from the Genomics England project that if you have a no return policy, then maybe patients take their genome and just go to direct to consumer testing. So it might be, it's worthwhile thinking about giving something back to the patient for their participant for their research support. And we have to find ways that patients participate in the exchange of research, or we discussed ways that were successful in an participant research context. And that this return of results needs to be linked to evidence. So that was our third question, but that clinicians and researchers are reluctant to return anything that is of very uncertain evidence and benefit for the individual. We also identified that there are context-specific areas that are different from the standard adult questions. So these are children, genetic results reported back to the parents or not, newborn screening, and relatives that are affected by genetic results. And we consented that any kind of returning of results an incidental finding needs resources to be integrated in the cost calculation for any project. Next steps to get forward, ideas for that was to collect experience with the handling of incidental findings, either through collecting additional requirements set up by ethic review boards that were experiences from the group, that ethic review boards come up with additional requirements in different settings, to collect cases where incidental findings were not reported to the individual, and then a law case were had the consequences of law cases, so negative cases in a way, but also positive cases where incidental findings were reported back and the individual benefited from this, so have a registry in this kind. And second, to have a follow-up on what that means in terms of costs for informing the patient within projects, the follow-up diagnostics and the follow-up benefits potentially, so to better inform kind of a cost calculation whether this individual information is the better way to go forward or can be supplemented, and that would go into your area rather than towards empowering patients and providers on a broader scale and not on an individual basis. But we had to focus on the individual, so there's an overlap here, I think. Second question, different subject, in the whole issue of information and consent, informing the patient adequately, and the issue of the tension between data provision and the protection of a person's privacy. So we discussed that in the end, informed consent operates on two different levels that are in tension with each other. Partly, first, it has the task of informing the participant, and that can be very tailored to the information needs. And it has the second function as serving as the legal basis for the use of the data. And the requirements for each of the two tasks are very different, because informing the patient, the participant needs can be tailored to the context-specific need of the participant, and can be very different if it's at the patient level or whether it's addressing different public areas. The family can be influenced by gender or by citizen interest. Whereas the legal basis, as we learned from the talk this morning, the GDPR offers or opens possibilities of other legal bases than consent for data processing. So maybe keeping this a little bit separate would pave the way for new consent models. And we discussed a lot about broad or dynamic consent models with no clear consensus on which way to go about. So areas for discussion here is including participants. That was also going to the first task in this designing of information and consent. Even within our working group, it would have been maybe worthwhile to have patients' representatives included or at this meeting. And collect experiences with different consent models, either dynamic or broad consent or specific consent models, but the newer ones, and build on that in personalized medicine. And the third issue was not so much on the patient exchange. This was really on how we regulate or govern our scientific progress, the tension between principles of evidence-based medicine and fast translation. So we discussed first that, for one, fast translation does not necessarily mean that it comes with a lack of evidence, because we have new ways of creating evidence, be it adaptive trial designs or biomarkers stratified big data analysis. But still, there was a consensus that in personalized medicine, we treat patients oftentimes without robust evidence for efficacy, and we don't follow up on them. So it would be, we don't really see the risk for side effects. We sometimes see the costs, but it leads to the next step suggestion that it would really be helpful to collect real-world evidence about these benefits of these lots of individual cases and risk that we have in the real world, and it would also ensure to find patterns of unfair access or ensure fair access to personalized medicine consultation or treatment. That would still require a need for adequate data collection of the real-world data so that they are meaningful and can be evaluated with regard to risk and access. We also identified an open problem or for detection of or recording of data that in the specific field of developing research and diagnostic tools, the requirement for validating diagnostic tools before the data can be, you can learn from the data, benefits a large proportion of the population, but the smaller one that might benefit from the new diagnostic tool is excluded. So that is the intermediate analysis of our discussions that were then interrupted by timeline.
Is there any question at the moment?
Yeah, I have just one question. Yeah, I was curious that you have not used the word that's specifically used with incidental findings, which is actionable, medically actionable. You have not used the expression. Mm-hmm. So you have not discussed this or divided that you should take this into account when reporting or not. So
that was in our discussion that you then need criteria, what kind of findings are reported, and that while, for example, researchers and doctors are leaning toward only actionable, if you ask the population or research participants, they want to learn what is not actionable but might be helpful for planning your life as well. So that would be the criteria for what kind of return packages to see then. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Jacques Demotte. I will report very shortly the working group number 3. I will ask you to change the slide. So it was about the transfer of research result into the market, how to optimize a safe, fast, and economic process to implement personalized medicine approaches. So next slide, please. Yeah. next slide shows the name of the chair of the session was Anarita Franco Miaccio. I don't know where is she. So in the back of the room, we had as a vice chair Sebastian Delbruck, and we also had as a vice rapporteur Ignacio Barnante from the institute here. We have identified 4 different questions during the preliminary discussion. The first one refers to the technological challenges for personalized medicine research, in particular the data generation and data analysis. The second one refers to the methodological standard for personalized medicine studies. The third one is which issues related to market and regulation have to be addressed first in order to facilitate market access of personalized medicine approaches. And the fourth one is about entrepreneurial challenges common to all the previous questions. So the first part of the discussion was lengthy. In fact, I shrunk the report, especially because we had a lot of discussion on aspects that are more related to the regulation. But we started the discussion with a presentation of the state of the art in the field of cancer. And it is interesting to see that in the field of cancer, there are now about 400 actionable genes that correspond to more or less 20 treatments available to target the gene in the targeted therapy approach. And what is interesting also is to see the development, because in the past the stratification in the personalized medicine approach in cancer was based on the single gene, or in other fields on single biomarker with a single cutoff. So this was typically the model of personalized medicine. I have one biomarker, and depending on the presence or the absence of the biomarker, this drives the treatment decision. Now in the field of cancer, things are changing, because it's not only one gene, but it is a cluster of genes, maybe 10, 20, 400 genes as mentioned. And we are going toward the whole genome sequencing, meaning that it will be thousands and thousands of information that will be made available to make the treatment decision. So this raises 2 questions. The first one is that there is no longer any clear-cut cutoff, meaning that we will have to determine what is the multidimensional arrangement that should be considered as a driver for the clustering of patients, and this will raise also the problem of the treatment decision. An aspect that is very important and was mentioned during the discussion is the quality of the data, the reproducibility of the data, and the reproducibility of the analysis, especially when we consider non-conventional analysis for stratification. Another problem was, let's say, the fact that if we want to be efficient and to be able to implement this strategy not in one single hospital but in multiple hospitals, if we want also to collect data from multiple hospitals, this way the question of developing or incentive for the development of pan-European interoperable standard for data collection, not only for the omic data, but also for the imaging data, for the electronic health record that are associated as a clinical endpoint and clinical annotation for the patient. This is important to be used for the patient stratification, meaning that when we run, for instance, clinical trials, the stratification is based on the omics, so we have to harmonize the omics. And these data could also be used as a secondary use of data in the clinical trial, especially the electronic health record from the hospital. But this raises also questions regarding the implementation of the general data protection regulation, because you know that since the legal basis differ from one country to another one, the interpretation of the GDPR in fact differs also. And another need that was expressed and discussed during this session was the need for training, especially training data scientists. And it was mentioned that there is a poster about summer school on machine learning, and this is typically what should be developed. And what we need is people with able to speak both languages, meaning being a data scientist plus a healthcare professional. This is typically what is needed. The second aspect that was covered during the discussion were the issue of the methodological standard for personalized medicine studies. So typically the personalized medicine studies are not just one study, they are research program with different steps in the program. Usually it starts with a stratification cohort and then a validation cohort. And one question that is currently unsolved is what is the optimal sample size for the robustness of the result from this cohort. Then there is a need for multi-omic analysis, because usually the biomarker is not a single biomarker, but there are now multi-dimensional biomarkers generated through multi-omics or imaging or exposome data or whatever big data can be used. Then the stratification can be done using conventional mathematical method, but more and more people use machine learning algorithm in order to identify homogeneous cluster of patients by reducing the intergroup variability and maximizing the intragroup and maximizing the intergroup variability. And so this raises also the question of the reproducibility and the robustness of this machine learning stratification. Then there could be, not always, but in many cases, once you have identified the cluster of patients, this is not enough, because this does not predict what are the treatments that should be tested in the different subgroup of patients. So you have to go back to preclinical models using the cellular model, organoid or animal models, in order to understand what are the treatments to be tested in the different subgroup of patients in the different clusters. And then you have to run a multi-arm trial to test the different treatment options in each of the cluster you have identified, and if possible also to compare the personalized medicine approach with the standard of care. So these programs are very lengthy, and what we need are methodological standard in order to ensure the adoption of the personalized medicine studies by the marketing authorization process. So this raises the question of what is acceptable for clinical trial authorization by ethics committee and competent authority, for the market access by the competent authority or the EMA, for the reimbursement by the health technology assessment, for funding, for publishing, and so on. So, and maybe there are different level of robustness that will be required for the different steps. Something important, and this is in link with what will be discussed in the next one, is that the regulation, there is no regulation for personalized medicine. In fact, there is a regulation for the diagnostics, and there is a regulation for the medical device and for the medicinal products, but there is no regulation that cover all the process. And in fact, the process of personalized medicine, if we simplify it, is the diagnostics plus the treatments plus the cutoff, and the cutoff may be a simple cutoff. It may be also an algorithm. So this raises a lot of questions. Something interesting is that in case the diagnostics does not impact the treatment decision, in this case the diagnostic doesn't require the CE labeling, because it can be seen as research use only. So it means that, for instance, when you just develop the first step, the stratification step, and if the stratification doesn't drive the treatment, in this step you don't need to have the CE labeling for the diagnostics. Next step, next slide please. Yeah. So the next slide refers to the I have to change also. The issues related to market and regulation have to be addressed first in order to facilitate market access of personalized medicine approaches. So there were a lot of discussion points here. So the first question raised by the competent authorities: what does your development program aim to market? Because some aim to market the diagnostic tools, some the health products, some both of them, and some other none of them. meaning that it's possible to run research on personalized medicine with diagnostics that are already on the market and with treatment that are already on the market. This raises a lot of regulatory challenges, in particular because the in vitro diagnostic regulation is not the same as the clinical trial regulation. It was not drafted by the same DG, and there are some different provisions. As I mentioned, the IVD, the in vitro diagnostics, require to see if it impacts the treatment decision, but only in this case. There was a question of the need to adapt the legislation and maybe to have a specific legislation for personalized medicine development. There were also discussion on the need for better regulatory awareness before the planning and the development of the method. In addition to this need, there is also another need on the side of the health technology assessment, meaning the need for evidence for superiority and cost effectiveness versus the standard of care for reimbursement decision, and also for the adoption by the medical community. For this, not only there is need for monitoring the post-marketing life of the personalized medicine process, but also to run comparative effectiveness trial. One question that was raised was to have the scientific advice group for personalized medicine solution. That would be probably extremely helpful for the people developing such solution. The same, having some sort of Cochrane group for personalized medicine, including, if possible, experts from the health technology assessment. Running together clinical trial, in the same clinical trial, running an experiment in order to get the marketing authorization, meaning demonstrating the added value in the single arms, and also to compare, let's say, the personalized medicine approach with the standard of care. And this is not for the marketing authorization purpose, but for the health technology assessment decision. Also, we consider that in some cases the market forces are not present to develop a personalized medicine solution, and it is the reason why there is a need for public funding. There could be also a need for public-private partnership funding, with using the manufacturer to provide some support for the development of the solution, but without having financial involvement from the manufacturer. And as I mentioned, in some cases there is no marketing authorization needed because the diagnostic is already on the market and the product are already on the market, and what should be developed is really the cutoff, meaning the stratification of the patient. And one thing that was also mentioned is the issue of the intellectual property and the need to make sure that you have secured all the intellectual property on the diagnostic side, on the treatment side, but also on the stratification side. Next slide, please. And I think this is the last one. We had also some discussion regarding what are the challenges for the entrepreneur involved in this process. So the first one is that for an SME it is something difficult because there is not only the issue of the market access, but also all the post-marketing monitoring, comparative effectiveness research, and so on. There is also another issue linked to the fragmentation of the market in the EU, meaning that even though you get an authorization marketing authorization at the pan-European level, then the implementation is dependent on the HTA decision in a single country, and there is no harmonization of such a decision. There is also the fact that the venture capital for the health sector is still very low in Europe when compared to the US. Low awareness of the users, meaning the healthcare professional, regarding the use, and so the slow capture of the personalized medicine solution. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a progressive change in the business model, meaning at the beginning it was mostly something linked to one single biomarker marketed by a pharma company, the companion diagnostic, or working with in vitro diagnostic companies. And now there is a shift toward a more data and artificial intelligence driven stratification that may correspond to the marketing of new solutions, but it can also correspond to the research in order to improve the healthcare, meaning reusing diagnostic procedure and treatment options that are already on the market, but working mostly on the use of data and the big data. And this is typically something that should be done by the academic organization. Thank you very much.
So working group number 4, first I have to say I'm very happy to see that the discussion that we all had is pretty much aligned with the spirit of the vision paper of ICPerMed, and I think it's excellent news. And I think it's also very interesting that coming from different questions, we all converge on the same spot, which is also very good. So our group was very large, more than 40 people, because it was basically about implementation. And because we have the responsibility of providing recommendations for implementation, we decided to structure the discussion into 2 parts. First one, today we discuss challenges and opportunities, and tomorrow we are going to come with the solutions and recommendations, okay? So come tomorrow, because please make sure, yeah. So if I can see the first slide, yeah. Anyway, the group was chaired by Professor Avi Israeli. Avi is Chief Scientific Officer at the Ministry of Health in Israel. He must be, okay. Hi, Avi. And the Vice Chair was Ricardo Pereira from the Foundation for Science and Technology in Portugal. Ricardo is also at the back. Myself from the EATRIS, the European Infrastructure for Translational Medicine. Anyway, we structured the discussion based on 3 issues. First one, next slide. First one was the institutional design, the structural design that is required for successfully implement personalized medicine. The second one was in specific interventions that are needed on the patient and population level to assure implementation. And the third one is the way for translating the scientific knowledge into real practical interventions, patient-targeted interventions in the framework on the healthcare domain. So some of the next slide. For the first question, the first thing that became evident is that the main idea is not to talk about the institutional framework, but we are really talking about a systemic change. So basically, the discussion was focused on specific designs, specific design that are needed for changing the way the healthcare system provides solutions to the patient community, to the population, putting the focus on the personalized medicine. So any interventional design should be designed having in mind this kind of systemic view of the healthcare system level. The design for implementing these solutions requires strong multi-sectorial cooperation, and there are key stakeholders along the entire process of delivering healthcare that are necessary for efficiently implementing personalized medicine, and that includes not only healthcare providers and clinicians, but also academia, policymakers, and of course, the patient community, the public, and the industry. It's important to implement these designs taking into consideration that the implementation process takes place at the local level. And actually, it's very important to consider successful interventions that are currently existing at the local level. So we have good examples of success at the regional level, at the local level, of personalized medicine targeted actions that should inspire us for upgrading this change at the systemic level. It's important, if we are taking into consideration this high systemic level, healthcare domain level, that we will need to introduce legislative changes, and as it has been mentioned before, also personalized medicine-oriented changes at the regulatory level, and that requires a strong dialogue and a strong cooperation with the policymakers. It's important because we need to involve the policymakers, identify the best way to establishing this dialogue with them, so they should be fully part of this process of development for changing or for improving the design in the way the healthcare system provides personalized medicine targeted interventions. And it's very important that from day one we take into consideration that if we are going to embark ourselves into this reshaping of the healthcare system, that personalized medicine has an important role at the preventive level. So preventive interventions should be introduced to bring personalized medicine at the population level. It's important from a, let's say, operational point of view that we develop a specific solution, a specific personalized medicine solution. This always should come from the patient's needs, and it must be fully built from this point. Of course, with the involvement of the patient community. We are talking, and of course, a large part of these interventions will use as a tool lives data, and data management data should fully follow from the very beginning of the research process up to the implementational level, the FAIR principles that should guide us on how to use this data to make sure that data is properly managed from very early stages of the research process. It's important also to think about specific recommendations at the funder level, and funders must fund independent clinical research-driven processes by the clinical community, because that's an essential innovative element for implementing personalized medicine interventions, and is a lack of funding for funding clinical trials, independent clinical trials, that should be also taken into consideration for increasing the efficiency of interventions of personalized medicine at the healthcare system level. And also it's important that funders must promote studies for measuring cost effectiveness of personalized medicine interventions. Next one. Second question was specific interventions, ideas on how to make an impact at the patient and population level. And it's important to take into consideration that there are two levels here. There are interventions at the patient level that should be personalized medicine interventions, taking into consideration already existing patient cohorts. At a different level is the population studies, basically focus on prevention interventions at the personalized medicine level. Of course, the patient community must be part of this co-creation process with other stakeholders. They are not a, let's say, passive element, but they must be very active, and they must be involved from very early stages at the design level. And it's important that when we define these interventions, we should do it taking into consideration the multidisciplinary nature of all the different stakeholders that participate in the process, in particular, of course, the patient community. And one example of that was the personalized medicine-oriented reshaping of population screening programs, where patients must be fully on board from the very beginning. It's important also to implement specific actions on the clinical community to support them and to provide them with tools and educational interventions to optimize the reuse of already existing clinical data for future interventions. And in this discussion, it has been already mentioned before, it's highly important to keep in mind that personalized medicine is not only about cancer and rare diseases, but if we want to expand the borders of personalized medicine to other disease domains, we need to take specific interventions to make sure that we are not going to talk only about genomic medicine, but we are going to have a wider overview of the molecular profile of the disease domain. We are talking about, of course, about implementing personalized medicine at the healthcare level, means that specific policies must be developed at the governmental level, and they have to be done based on the cooperation of the different policymakers that are present at the regional and national level. And we must make sure that ministers of education, ministers of research, minister of health, they will work together to implement these specific actions on personalized medicine. Of course, if we want to involve the patient, if we want to involve the public, we must facilitate that one, and we must promote health literacy at the patient and public level. And this should be done on the basis of demonstrating to the population the added value of personalized medicine. When we talk about measuring the cost efficiency of personalized medicine intervention, it's very important from this perspective of the policy making that we take into consideration that when we measure the cost of healthcare intervention, we should also take into account indirect cost of opting or not for a personalized medicine or no personalized medicine targeted intervention, which means that there are other costs on the patient's life that have to be taken into consideration, such as sickness leave, of the cost of home support, and so on. And because we are not a uniform landscape in Europe, and we are not only 28-27 member states, but we are a number of dozens of regional policy makers that have the specific responsibility of implementing personalized medicine actions in their own territory. Cultural differences, societal differences that are present across Europe must be taken into account when we plan educational interventions on the community. The third question was how to translate the scientific knowledge into these patient-targeted interventions. There were here quite a few interesting ideas. It's important to take into account, as I mentioned before, that we are not talking only about genomic medicine. Personalized medicine represents a much broader scope, which means that there is a big scientific challenge in which the data will come from multiple sources, not only from the genomic field. And actually, there were very interesting examples. Imaging diagnostic pipelines should be integrated with genomic pipelines to provide specific targeted solutions, and we must take this kind of multi-omic perspective of personalized medicine. There are important challenges here, and we are all aware that GDPR regulations may represent still a barrier for the reuse of data from existing cohorts, and we must tackle specific actions to solve this barrier. At the global level, other initiatives for implementing personalized medicine actions are already in place. And we must link our strategies with other global initiatives that they work on the integration of data with the purpose of developing specific interventions at the healthcare system. And there are different tools and different strategies for doing that. One example that could be a good tool for implementation would be the specific development of national plans, and cancer national plans are a good example. Personalized medicine specific interventions should have a place there. With this global perspective, it's important that, and it has been mentioned before, that we work on the standardizations initiatives, and there are already very big and very important efforts at global level. They should be benchmarked and also integrated in our own standardization strategies. And at the end of the day, we are going to need to develop a full translational assessment framework. And there are very interesting stakeholders here. One of them, of course, is the HTA, the Health Technology Assessment Community. And probably one of the solutions that we are going to propose tomorrow is to establish some sort of cooperation between ICPerMed and the HTA community. So this is pretty much what we discuss, and tomorrow the solutions.
So we are just 5 minutes over time, but I would like to make 2 points which maybe can be considered tomorrow. One, I was missing insurances, especially in the talks for group 3 and 4, because they have to decide what they pay. And in each region, at least maybe region, and sometimes in the member states, they have complete different systems of insurances. And the other aspect is profit industry, venture capital, also for number 3 and number 4. Yeah. So thank you very much. We don't have time for questions now, but there will be another session to finalize this tomorrow. And I would like to thank everybody who's been in one of the work groups, everybody who took a chair, vice chair, rapporteur or vice rapporteur position. And I'm very curious what will be the outcome tomorrow. Maybe for tomorrow you sharpen your presentation because you made already a couple of points, so we have more time